Welcome to Sharing Stories. I am Jeremiah Childers.
And I'm Kelly Kirksey.
And I'm Jim LeMay.
And we're so glad that you're here today as we continue sharing stories about the way that we're working with our intergenerational groups. This week, we're going to be talking about probably one of the biggest themes that Jesus talks about in his ministry, which is forgiveness. And forgiveness is something that is personal to each of us because it deals with the pains and the hurts that not only are inflicted on us, but sometimes the pains and the hurts that we've inflicted on others. And it can be a difficult conversation because it gets really to personal things in our lives. So before we get started, Jim, would you read for us out of Matthew one of the times that Jesus talks about forgiveness? And it's in response to his disciples' question.
All right. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves when he began the reckoning. One who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his Lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the Lord of that slave released him and forgave the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him by the throat, he said, pay what you owe. Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me, and I will pay you. But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their Lord all that had taken place. Then his Lord summoned him and said to him, you wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his Lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So, my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart.
Powerful words.
Yep.
So Peter, this is after an exchange that Jesus has given the disciples about talking about those that maybe have sinned within the community and what do you do? And he talks about forgiving them. And Peter says, well, how many times should we do that? Now,
Solid question.
It is. I mean, think about how many times that you've had to deal with a situation with somebody or maybe even yourself. And sometimes forgiveness over and over again can lead you feeling what?
Used.
Yeah. Used.
Walked over.
The other person's not willing to change.
Yeah.
To make concrete steps. And for Peter, it feels like, okay, there's got to be like a limit to forgiveness.
Right.
Have you ever been at your limit where you felt like it's getting to the point it's getting really hard to forgive somebody over and over again?
Yes. I feel like I'm a lot like Peter in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I can be, Kelly said used, but you can be put upon so many times and eventually you're going to want to just say no.
Just say no. So it's interesting. He tells this, and then he tells a parable. He tells this wonderful story, and it's one of my favorite parables out of Matthew. And it starts off with the king having people coming to settle debts. And, you know, the books have been laid out, and everybody's debts are out there for what they owe. And one person owes this huge amount of money. And what does the king do?
he pleads with the one to whom he owes the debt
Yeah.
to forgive him. To, well, not really to completely forgive him, just to
Yeah.
don't take a bad action against me now.
Yeah.
Let me give me a chance to pay you back.
Yeah. So there's this, the king is given an option and he takes it to be essentially to give this person some grace.
Feels like a mob boss.
The king,
Yeah. Where it's like, please give me some more time.
Yeah.
Don't break my legs right now.
well, or don't take away what, don't come in and confiscate my property.
Right. Or my family. They would take.
So this person owes money, can't pay. There's a grace that comes from the king. And you can imagine being the person in the story that is given that grace. What would be your response?
Thank you.
A thank you. You'd be filled with gratitude. Immediately after he leaves this scene, he goes into an area where other people are waiting and he sees somebody that owes him money.
Mm-hmm.
And what does he do to the person?
He's like, you got to pay me.
Yeah, he literally grabs him by the throat and starts to, you can imagine the scene. He's shaking him. He's essentially shaking him down for the money that's owed. And immediately after he's been given grace, he sees somebody, and instead of saying to himself, maybe I should what?
Give them grace.
Give them grace. He doesn't, and other people see it. It gets back to the king, and the king becomes infuriated.
Right.
Because in the relationship for the king and the person, the grace that he gave was such a huge amount of grace in comparison to what the other man was owed by the person he met in the hallway, which was in comparison smaller.
Right.
And he couldn't give just a little bit of grace to that person. And Jesus says over and over again in Matthew's gospel, if you're not willing to forgive others, then how can you expect God to forgive you? He says it after the Lord's Prayer. In the prayer, we're told to ask for forgiveness as we forgive others. And then Jesus says afterwards, if you're not able to do this, then God can't forgive you. And I always go back to this story and I think about my life, and maybe you'll think about your life. And I'll think about my life as kind of those books of debt that the king has. And he opens the book, and God opens the book for me and sees all the times that God has forgiven me of things that really only God and I know about.
Uh-huh.
All the things that I've thought, all the things that I've said, all the things that I've done that really nobody else knows it. And if anybody else got a hold of that book, their probably image of me, the image of you, the image of anybody else would become so skewed they wouldn't want to be in a relationship with us. Because they would just see those negative things that we thought, that we've said, that
Yeah.
we've done. And for me, it's an awareness is that God loves me and is willing to give me grace on things that I know nobody else in my life, other than maybe my wife or my parents, but even then, could do. Just because of things I've thought, I've said, I've done.
Right.
And if God can forgive me all those things, that huge debt, then when somebody inflicts harm on me, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, how can I not at least attempt to begin the process of forgiveness of somebody else? Have you ever imagined if somebody got a hold of everything you thought, said, and did, what would happen?
Well, I talk to the youth sometimes about what if somebody took your phone and they put all of your text or your snaps online? What would that look like for you? Yeah. And always it's bad. They're always that would be terrible, because it is sort of this, it's conversations you have with just one person, where they understand when you say something that maybe you wouldn't say to everybody else, or, but even more so, that's a glimpse of what it would look like to look inside your brain.
Yeah.
And think even the thoughts that you think, well, that wasn't kind. You correct yourself in your own brain, but it doesn't mean you don't have those thoughts initially.
Recently, I sent out a text to some family, and somebody sent out a text back, and quickly realized other people were on the text, and somehow was able to edit it so not everybody could see it. I don't know how they were able to do that, but I thought to myself, "Oh my, how many times could I have done that if I wasn't careful? And it wasn't necessarily something horrible, but it would be something that could hurt them later on or could hurt somebody else's feelings. And, oftentimes those things that we think and do in our heads and minds and hearts aren't necessarily things that other people see, but God sees them.
Mm-hmm.
And God is willing to forgive us of those things. So when we talk about forgiveness, one of the things I try to remind people over and over again is in many ways, this is a central part of our faith. Part of it is the cross and resurrection. Part of it is what Jesus is inviting us to be a part of a community that is bringing harmony and wholeness to one another through the process of forgiveness and repentance. It is something that allows us to move away from anger, which leads to hate, which can lead to other parts of our lives. So when you think about your life, has there been a time that either someone has caused you pain, sometime you've had to give forgiveness or receive forgiveness, and how did that experience transform and change you? And I'll let you guys kind of think. I thought about this question this week, and we've talked about this question during Lent and other times. And, there have been incidences in my life where people have harmed other people around me. But as I've thought about it, I've never really been really, really inflicted with pain or harm. I've never been abused. I've never had anyone been overly malicious to the point that I just felt unsafe or unkind. But I have watched people in my life hurt other people that I'm close to. And I think for me, that's the part where I have to stop and say, although it wasn't directly towards me, it did impact me. And it did hurt me. And it did cause me pain and grief. And it's been a process where sometimes I would rather them have hurt me than hurt somebody I love. Because oftentimes, like Jesus says, where your heart is, there, that's where your treasure is. And sometimes our heart is with people that we love. And for me, that's been the times where I've had to really struggle with forgiveness, is because they've hurt something or somebody I love so much. Sometimes it's been people that have committed adultery on somebody that I care about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's been someone who has walked out on their family, on somebody I care about. And I can't imagine how much more they have to deal with the pain and the hurt and how they have to offer forgiveness. But one of the things I've learned is, for me, going through this process of forgiveness, which isn't easy, it's very difficult, allows me not to carry that weight of anger and frustration and hate. Because eventually you'll look at that person and deep down you'll say to yourself, it would be better if they just weren't in the picture, and whatever that looks like. A lot of times people say, it'd be better if they were just dead, or they're dead to me. So how have you dealt with forgiveness? Has there been an incident in your life where it's really been something that you've struggled with? Do you find it to be something you still struggle with?
I think it's a hard question because a lot of things that cause us the most pain are from the people that are closest to us. Mm-hmm. I mean, anybody who has been married or has children or is close to their parents or not close to their parents, like all of those relationships are like, the depth of them means that there will be pain because you will hurt each other. Yeah. And so they all bring like the need for forgiveness and reconciliation and bring up and if you can't forgive, if you can't find some sort of ground to walk on, because forgiveness, I think that the thing that's hard about forgiveness is that it's not just once.
Yeah.
I think maybe because I've grown up in the evangelical church, and the entire picture of Christ and salvation is this one moment that you walk down the aisle and Christ forgives you. But I think when we think about that, a lot of times it's just this one moment. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, in our lives, forgiveness is a lot of moments.
Yeah.
And it's a continual, yeah, I see you again. And you know what? I still don't like you. And I have to forgive you again. And that doesn't even get into having to forgive ourselves for our part in whatever happened,
Yeah.
which comes to. And so I think that is what makes this question so hard, is because it's so personal. I know that I've talked about before, growing up in a church that would not ordain me and would not affirm my ministry. And when I came back from Baylor, I went and worked at that church again as soon as I got back from college. And so it was a world that I've been a part of for a long time. And so I think that there was a whole process while I was at Baylor for 4 years and, recognizing my call to ministry. But then also when I came home and had to reevaluate that call because I was surrounded by people that told me I could not do that. And then even in seminary, because I was, this was still a part of my daily life. And so just a continual kind of rehashing of that over and over and over again. And feeling like hurt that the people who raised me wouldn't support me.
Yeah.
That the people that baptized me would never ordain me, and so that they could see Christ in me, but only this far.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, that is probably like the bigger pain, that I don't really feel as much anymore.
Yeah.
It's not been an issue for me, but I will say, we had about a year ago, 2 years ago now, when the SBC voted on their the law amendment. I think that's what it was called. Anyways, and they were voting about whether they were going to kick all the churches out that had ordained women. And it was like a trigger for me.
Yeah.
And it was very upsetting. And it was something I had not worried about in years. Like I have made peace with all of that, like God is at work in those churches that will not ordain me, and God is at work in the churches that will, and like I've kind of reconciled all that to myself. But I remember, being in the atrium when and listening to them argue about this. And I was getting ready for Vacation Bible School, and I was here every night until so late, prepping and trying to get things ready for these 150 kids that were going to be in the building. And they were arguing about whether or not my ministry would be affirmed.
Yeah.
And it was so hurtful.
Yeah.
And they were people I didn't know, that really had no impact on my life specifically. But I think as I was listening to it, because I just wanted to see what was going to happen, I thought, like no one is arguing on my behalf. Because in the argument that they had, no one stood up and said women can be ordained.
Yeah.
The argument was about whether or not they wanted to kick the churches out.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with whether or not my ministry could ever be affirmed.
Yeah.
Like, because that wasn't on the table anymore.
Yeah.
And so, even years after I really had put all of that to like rest, it like just kind of reared its ugly head and had to like kind of process that again of, okay, like I know that these people are seeking God in their way.
Yeah.
And, how can I like forgive? And they're not asking for my forgiveness, but I have to give it to be able to like move on in my own life and say like, it's okay. You will never affirm this. And like, that's between you and God. And like, but I will go on and do my ministry. What about you, Jim?
I can remember as a young person having I had a best friend at school, and we spent a fair amount of time together. And then we got a new student in the school. And for anyone who knows my history, I went to 6 different elementary schools. We moved around a lot. The person moving into the school where I was at was someone I knew from a previous school and had been friends with, and whom I liked a great deal. And so we were beginning to reacquaint ourselves. And the best friend I had that was in the school spoke to this person, lying to them about how I felt about them, and wrecked that relationship. I mean, on a permanent basis. I mean, we just were never able to. And so I had a hard time forgiving my friend and forgiving the person who so readily rejected me
Yeah.
just on the statements of someone whom she didn't even know. So I had a hard time with that one. That was one of the first real occasions where, and I was already a Christian. I mean, where forgiveness was a challenge, was difficult on both sides of that.
As we think about forgiveness, you've already mentioned that it's it's not a once and done, it's a continual process. And one of the things I'm often reminded of, and we've talked about it in different places, is that when Jesus gives us a model prayer, he prays not only for daily bread, which we need for sustenance and nourishment, but we also pray daily to be forgiven and to forgive others.
Yeah.
Because as important it is to make sure that we eat, it's also important enough to make sure that our hearts are in a place where that we are being spiritually fed. And the only way that we can be fed by God's grace and mercy is if we're willing to offer that same grace and mercy to others. And for me, there have been times in my life where I thought that, the thing that I'd forgiven somebody for was over. You feel at peace with it. And then something triggers you. And you go back to that moment in time where you were hurt or they hurt somebody else, and you have to relive it. And you're back there with the same pain, the same hurt, and you have to forgive again. And sometimes it can be a continual cycle of forgiving something that happened many years ago, over and over again. And part of that isn't necessarily for the other person. It's for
Right.
you. Because if you're not careful, those kind of things can, we would say, become spiritually toxic in your soul, to the point that it bleeds into how you relate to other people, how you trust other people, how you treat other people. And Jesus is very aware that forgiveness is something that helps not just cleanse us in our relationship with God and with others, but it cleanses our heart. Because if we leave that kind of anger and resentment in there, it does come out sideways. Have you ever experienced that, where you know somebody that is struggling to forgive somebody, and it has affected the way that they interact with other people?
Yeah, I think one of the things when you were talking about this story that I had never really thought about before from our text that we read earlier, was, I always read this and I think, okay, the man was forgiven his debts, but then he went out and wouldn't forgive someone else. Like, wow, that's mean. Like, you shouldn't do that. And just sort of that, like, oh, well, the inability to forgive. But then I was thinking about, when we were just reading it, about how, if I was him and I had just been in here begging, for leniency and for grace, and then I walk in, because I have nothing to give, and there is a chance like they'll come and they'll take the things that I own. They'll take maybe my children. And those are big, big things to lose. And then I walk out into the hallway, and one of the reasons I can't pay that is standing right there.
Yeah.
Because they haven't paid me. And so I just had never thought about it in that way. where like you turn around and you're like, okay, you have to pay me right now because I still have to pay them.
Yeah.
And like I've been given leniency, but like it's not going to last forever. And so you're going to need to pay me. And so kind of the recognition of like when you do that, you don't realize that the person standing in front of you may also be in the exact same position you're in, and they too can't pay you. And so you only see your problem. You don't see the person there.
Yeah.
And I think that that is kind of speaks to this question of, when we don't forgive someone, a lot of the problem is that we refuse to see what they're living through at that time, and we're not giving empathy to them. We're not saying, hey, and it doesn't make what they did right.
Yeah.
But it means it's easier to not forgive when you do not see the person.
The way that you said that is, a lot of times we do see people as just problems.
Mm-hmm.
They're obstacles in our life for our happiness, our joy, whatever. And instead of seeing them as human beings, we see them as problems, where the king is able to see the person in the man that owes. The other man just sees the problem that he needs to be fixed and reconciled. And for me, when I've realized that in my life, when somebody has viewed me as a problem, and I'm sure somebody has, when they've stopped viewing me as a problem and as a person again, that is a beautiful way of thinking about resurrection in terms of a new life and a new experience with somebody else. So how many times, for me, have I seen somebody and just look at them and think, they're a problem, and I'm either going to have to avoid the problem, I'm going to have to fix the problem, solve the problem, but never actually think I need to love the problem.
Right.
And that's a good way of thinking about it that you brought up, Kelly.
Well, I think it impacts the way we see everyone.
Yeah.
Because it's much easier to put people in their category.
Yeah.
This person is, like you were saying, like this is the problem this person is. This is this way and that's that way. And so then when we do that, it's just so much easier for us to not look at like, why are they that way?
Yeah.
I think that's part of the importance of why we do this, is to say, okay, it's much easier to look at someone who is 30 years younger than you that never looks at you, because a lot of younger generations, their interpersonal skills are very different than older generations because they've grown up in front of screens and things like that. And they don't talk to you and they don't, and say, well, those young people are just rude.
Yeah.
Or for a young person, like they always are looking at me, but they don't talk to me. They're judging me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I always hear that. Like, I know that they're judging me. How do you know that? I saw their face. And you're like, well, you're judging them, judging you. It's like this whole thing. And so I think it's why it is so important that we say, like, we share our stories, because then people become people. All of a sudden you're, oh, well, I know how they grew up.
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, gosh, how many people, if you understand their relationships with their parents, you understand so much more about them. Yeah. And so I think that, and in the forgiveness piece, if you understand someone's story, it makes it so much easier to say, like, I get why you said it this way, and it was hurtful to me, but I understand now that you didn't mean it in that way, or that you did mean it in that way, and that your hurt, the way you're hurting me, comes from a hurt that came from somewhere else for you.
Yeah.
So, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Well,
It's hard for us to put ourselves in other people's places. We have our point of view, and we are who we are, so it's really hard to see perhaps how we might have wounded someone else inadvertently,
yeah.
even. But still, we don't necessarily see that it was a wound. They felt it that way.
Yeah.
So then there is a need to be forgiven as well as to forgive.
Well, as you are listening to the podcast, as you have your intergenerational groups, one of the things that I'm acutely aware of is some of you have been hurt in ways that we can't imagine. Um, Probably the greatest hurt I can think of is for those that have had parents that have neglected, abused, hurt mentally, physically, spiritually. And many of you may be dealing with areas of that in your life. And the intergenerational group's not necessarily the place to work that out. So, as a staff, if there are areas in your life where you are really struggling with forgiveness, reach out to us. We're here to help you process it, to help you walk through that journey of forgiveness, not necessarily for the person that's necessarily hurt you, that's part of it, but really to help you become the person God needs you to be so that you can fully be alive. And I do think that part of abundant life that Jesus gives is one where you're not carrying that heavy weight of anger and resentment. For those that are going through a season in life right now where maybe you are being hurt by somebody you really love, could be a parent, spouse, maybe it's not something they're doing intentionally to you, but around you that hurts. Again, we as a staff are here to be with you, to walk through that with you as well. As you discuss in your groups, make sure in your groups that when you hear these stories, that you just listen. Don't offer judgments about the situations that come up
Or advice.
but just be there to listen. Many of the things that have happened in each of our lives may seem similar, but they're always going to be different. And someone's experiences are always different than mine. And I have to be careful that I don't try to interject my story into somebody else's story, especially around wounds and pains and hurts. Because you can have two people in the same family that experience the same thing, and it's going to hurt someone else more than the other, just because of who they are. So we're here for you as a staff. Look forward to seeing all of you in our small groups. Jim, we want to thank you for being here today. Thank you for helping lead not only small group now, but you've led one in our last year as well, and appreciate you doing that.
I also want to say too that this topic is always really difficult because a lot of people associate forgiveness with allowance or tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be clear, when you forgive someone, it does not mean that you do not have boundaries.
Yeah.
And that you do not go back and continue to be hurt again and again and again, because that's not what forgiveness is. You can forgive and still say, I'm not going to go back into that toxic relationship. And so just to be clear about that, because this text has been used for so long to say, you need to forgive and then you need to walk back into a really unhealthy situation. So
I always try to remind people, true forgiveness is seeing the person that's hurt you as alive again. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in relationship with that person. It is in such a way that they are in the back of your mind fully a person again, but not necessarily you're having to have dinner with them. You're having to be in the same relationship you were before. But it is not thinking of them as either dead or you want them to die or any of that sort of stuff. Because I do think when we get to that point, sometimes they become such a problem. The only solution we have is to kill them in our hearts.
Mm.
And we put them in a grave and we just leave them there. And that's not necessarily what Jesus would have us to do. Because that person, wherever they are, whatever they're doing, is still beloved by God. Even at their worst behavior in their worst moments. And as followers of Jesus, we're called to live counterculturally. And let's just be honest, in our culture right now, people want to get payback and people want to keep track of who's hurt them. And it's become even more so, I think, in our culture over the last probably 8 years, 12 years of this kind of sense of, we sue people for every little thing. So just as a reminder is that we live counterculturally. And part of that is living a life of forgiveness. That isn't easy. Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me. It's hurtful to pick up a cross of forgiveness. It's not easy.
I'd like to say one thing. and that is that small groups, as we are practicing it, touches on a lot of sensitive issues for people. This one in particular about forgiveness is one of those. Small groups are a way for us, based on how you end up processing what we're going through in the small group, are going to bring out issues that you may want to talk to someone about. Because small group, as we see it, it's not group therapy. And so if you need some counsel, seek a staff person. Get a referral if you need professional assistance. There's nothing wrong with that. This small groups are a way for us to be together, identifying things in our lives and sharing it with others who also have things that they need to share and are sharing. And we hold that in careful, I think we just hold it very carefully in trust. Where, if your small group is like mine, we don't talk about things outside a group with other people. Everything that's in the group stays in the group. And that's important. But if you identify something in your life that you need help with, there are people here to help you with that. And we want to affirm that for you.
Well, we hope you all have a great week. Thank y'all for being here today. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.